Okay, so welcome to this session. In this presentation, I would like to discuss a pedagogical intervention designed to promote student feedback literacy in an academic writing module in an Irish university, University College Dublin. And the intervention involves integrating multiple sources of feedback, including generative AI. So first, I would like to begin by providing an overview of the feedback and assessment design. And then I will outline 6 evidence-based interventions designed to promote feedback literacy and emerging AI feedback literacies more specifically. So I will zoom into the integration of Gemini as a feedback tool into this feedback ecosystem. And I will also share some of the students' perspectives on Gemini's feedback, different aspects of Gemini's feedback, and its comparison with human feedback, feedback from peers, feedback from teachers. I will also outline some of the benefits and the challenges and suggest strategies to mitigate some of the risks. Now, the intervention was embedded in UCD's International Pre-Master's Pathway Program within a critical reading and research writing module. The module helps students from diverse disciplines to develop academic writing and research skills required at graduate level, and to foster their development as autonomous and strategic writer capable of self-regulating their writing processes beyond the module. And another intention was to clearly promote emerging generative AI literacies. So one of the main assessment strategies in this module is the submission of a portfolio of research writing. So this is essentially a collection of different written artifacts, all focused on the same subject-specific topic. And students submit their research plan and annotated bibliography where they summarize and critically evaluate their sources, the outline of their final research project, including citations. And they also compose a literature review matrix, which is essentially a database of all of the notes they take, critical notes they take from the sources they review, and the final research project. Now, throughout their research writing journey, students engage with multiple feedback sources, and they maintain a feedback journal where they capture and reflect on and critically compare diverse feedback types after each episode. And this design promotes a view of feedback as a dialogic process and a shared responsibility among students, teachers, and AI. So in this model, the teacher empowers students to be active agents in their feedback and learning. And of course, central to this is the notion of feedback literacy, which involves capabilities to understand, interpret, and use feedback effectively. So the original intention was really to promote a variety of feedback, student feedback literacy capabilities, as these are discussed by Dawson and others, and Molloy and others, 2020. And these informed the pedagogical intervention. And GenAI was integrated into this framework as a feedback ally to help students develop emerging feedback literacies in a context where GenAI tools are used. So to be more specific, these literacies involve understanding AI-generated feedback and recognizing its learning impact, engaging and applying GenAI feedback through feedback prompting, feedback judgment, evaluating AI feedback, and acting on feedback for improvement, managing emotional responses to positive critical GenAI feedback, and of course, understanding the ethical implications of GenAI feedback and the potential biases and limitations. So the first intervention was the analysis of apprentice exemplars against standards to help students develop an understanding of the assessment criteria. So students are provided with 3 sample assignments, and they have to apply an analytic rubric and assessment criteria to produce a feedback report. They complete this task, the critical evaluation, individually first, then they compare their feedback reports with their peers, and then the teacher provides the official feedback report. So this is an excellent opportunity for the writing tutor to model the behavior, the thinking processes, and the capabilities of the expert peer reviewer, the examiner. And it's also an opportunity to mediate the criteria, unpack the descriptors, and teach the meta language needed that students need to use to discuss the quality of academic work. The next step is the peer review task. So students share their drafts with a peer reviewer from the writing group. And again, using the same assessment criteria, they receive written peer feedback, and then they have a peer conferencing session. Using a very specific protocol, we use the Harvard's ladder of feedback, because this allows students to structure their conversations around the written peer feedback they have received, and we provide specific prompts. So the next step then is interacting with Gemini to generate and evaluate rubric-based feedback on the same draft. So it is important for the Gemini's feedback to be received after peer feedback. We don't want to undermine the value of peer feedback. So in terms of this interaction, students are provided with specific prompts, and I will give you some examples in a minute. And the next step in the process is to really reflect on peer feedback, Gemini feedback on draft 1, and critically evaluate these feedback, these two in a feedback journal. Students are then expected to act on the feedback they have received and revise their assignment. They produce a second draft, which is self-assessed and also reviewed against Turnitin. And this is the version they submit to their writing tutor for formative feedback. So they receive written feedback comments, and they also have an academic consultation, a writing conferencing session where they have the opportunity to discuss the written feedback with their tutor, ask clarification questions, and then they complete the second part of their feedback journal, which allows them to triangulate the 3 types of sources feedback. So they have to compare human feedback, teacher feedback, peer feedback with Gemini's feedback. And we ask them very specific questions, and I will show you some of the findings later on. And the final step in the process is to submit the final revised version for grading through our virtual learning platform. So in the rest of the session, I would like to really focus on students' interaction with Gemini, and I will provide examples of some of the prompts that we are using. But before students have this interaction with the tool, we are expecting them to complete 2 self-directed modules. These are embedded in our virtual learning platform. The first one is focused on academic integrity, and in fact, it focuses on the university's related policies, and it is designed by the UCD library. And the second one is focused on AI readiness. So this is essentially a student-friendly introduction to large language models, GenAI tools, and ethical considerations, again, always within the context of academic studies. So the next step upon completion of these 2 modules is for students to attend an academic integrity workshop facilitated by the writing tutors. And this also addresses the use of GenAI. So students are asked to rate the acceptability of various GenAI uses, and together with the teachers, we co-design ethical guidelines. And it is important to point out that this promotes critical engagement with GenAI, and these co-developed guidelines can serve as in a way as a contract that all of our students have to honor. And we also have specific guidelines for EAP teachers. So what are the ethical, acceptable, unacceptable uses for EAP teachers? So in class, there is a session where the teacher models the interaction with Gemini. So this is one of the prompts that we provide. As you can see, Gemini is instructed to act as an experienced EAP writing tutor, and in order to provide constructive feedback in alignment with the assessment rubric for the final research project. And also it is important to highlight that Gemini is instructed not to rewrite any parts of the student's assignments, any part of the student text, but simply provide scaffolding, ask questions for reflection, offer metalinguistic feedback. So students upload the prompt, they copy and paste the prompts, and they also upload the assignment guidelines, the analytic assessment rubric and their draft. And then we ask them to critically evaluate the outputs. And we do have, again, guidelines to help them understand how they can design effective prompts. And we also provide a series of more targeted prompts, which are directly linked to each of the assessment criteria included in the rubric we have for the research project. So for example, here you can see prompts that can provide feedback on specific aspects such as the thesis statement, the author's stance, the use of evidence, prompts related to structure, coherence, academic language use. And of course, we expect students to critically engage with Gemini's feedback. They cannot passively they cannot accept it uncritically. And they do submit their interactions with Gemini, and they also submit their critical reflections on the quality of the feedback they receive. So to evaluate different aspects of Gemini's feedback, the 20 students enrolled in the module were asked to complete an anonymous questionnaire with closed and open-ended questions. 15 responses were recorded. Just to clarify, this was treated as a pilot study. I am replicating this now in the context of our summer pre-sessional courses. So 200 students have been offered participation. So hopefully we will have a very rich data set at the end of the pre-sessional program. So if you can, looking at the quantitative data here, this bar chart illustrates students' perceptions of the overall quality of Gemini's feedback on their draft research projects. Out of 15 responses, the majority rated the feedback positively. And here we can see data on the usefulness of Gemini's feedback for revision. So this distribution mirrors the previous slide identically. And this suggests that students directly link the perceived quality of the feedback to its practical utility for revising their work, which is expected. It's not surprising, really. So this slide shows students' perspectives on the specificity of Gemini's feedback, which is crucial for actionable revision. The pie chart shows that 67% of students found the feedback specific, 33% indicated it was somewhat specific. And it is important to note that no students reported that feedback as vague or very specific. Now, this slide shows the perceived helpfulness of Gemini's feedback, specifically on the clarity, strength, and development of the main argument or thesis statement. So a significant 73% of students found this feedback helpful, and the remaining 27% reported it as somewhat helpful. So this is a particularly positive result, I think, because thesis development and argumentation are higher order writing skills, traditionally challenging for automated feedback. Now, if we look at the feedback on the use of evidence here, the quality, relevance, integration of evidence from academic sources. Now here the responses are more split. So 47% of students found it helpful, and another 47% found it somewhat helpful. A small segment, 6%, found it very helpful. So this distribution suggests that while Gemini can provide some useful input on the use of evidence, its consistency or depth in assessing aspects such as the quality and integration of evidence might vary. And regarding feedback on the overall organization, logical flow, transitions, 40% of students found Gemini's input helpful, and notable 46% found it somewhat helpful. A small percentage, 13%, found it not helpful. And this slide here shows the focuses on language use. So this involves clarity, academic tone, grammar, spelling. So 47% of students found this feedback somewhat helpful, while 40% found it helpful and 13% found it very helpful. So it's interesting to note the relatively higher, very helpful percentage here compared to some other higher order skills, because this aligns with the generally acknowledged strength of AI in identifying surface levels linguistic errors. And I think this is interesting. This comparative table provides an overview of how students perceived the distinct characteristics of peer, Gemini, and teacher feedback. So this is based on qualitative analysis of students' comments in the reflective journal. So in terms of detail, peer feedback was very often seen as superficial, and Gemini's feedback was viewed as detailed, but sometimes students said they felt that it was overly verbose and repetitive, and teacher feedback was viewed as balanced and specific. So in terms of the focus, peer feedback leaned towards the content. Just to clarify that students were grouped in the research writing groups, students were together with colleagues from a similar or the same discipline. So they did have a very good knowledge of the research area, the research topics, and this explains why peer feedback was focused on the content of the projects. And the peer feedback also captured presentation issues. Gemini excelled at grammar, vocabulary, and structure, not surprising. And while teacher feedback focused on argument and structure and content, which shows that it was very comprehensive, captured all areas of all of the assessment criteria. Now, in terms of clarity, Gemini's feedback, particularly for mechanics, was perceived as clear, whereas peer feedback was mixed and teacher feedback was consistently very clear. Now, the next one is an important factor, credibility. Students sometimes questioned peer feedback's credibility due to the shared academic standing, but trusted Gemini, especially for mechanics, and teacher feedback was highly trusted. So teacher feedback was felt to be the proxy, because students think that the writing teacher is the expert, the authority to make evaluative judgments. So that was never challenged. And finally, in terms of usefulness, peer feedback was useful for idea generation. Students reported that it helps them to look at their own work through their classmates' perspectives. Gemini was used for grammar and style improvements, and teacher feedback was for strategic overall improvement. And students reported that they appreciated the individualized feedback they received from the writing tutor, because clearly they had an understanding of their writing development over the course of the semester. So this comparative analysis emphasizes that each source offers unique strengths, highlighting the potential for a multifaceted feedback ecosystem. And I think one of the key findings for this case study is the strong student preference for multi-source feedback, with participants noting that each source played a unique and complementary role. So this strongly suggests the importance of teaching triangulation skills, equipping students to synthesize and evaluate feedback from peers, AI, and teachers, rather than relying on a single source. And as one student mentioned in the feedback, they do prefer a combination of all three types of feedback to get a wider perspective. And another important point raised by one of the students, they suggested that teachers should schedule separate sessions for each feedback type and a session on how to synthesize feedback from different sources. So this reinforces the idea that GenAI is a tool to be integrated and it's not a replacement. Now, I would also like to outline some of the challenges that I faced. The first one was to ensure the quality and consistency of peer feedback. Clearly, students need a lot of scaffolding and training to become effective peer reviewers. So there were sessions and like the assignment workshop I mentioned earlier, where they analyzed exemplars and the teacher provided feedback on the quality and nature of students' feedback comments. very clear guidelines and support throughout the way. So this is essential to ensure that all students receive high quality peer feedback. I would also like to mention something that is not here on the slide, and this concerns the linguistic challenges. The linguistic dimension of these practices should not be underestimated. Especially considering students' English language level, I think it's very important to teach the meta language students need to participate in peer review activities. And also we do provide a glossary, and the writing teacher models appropriate language use in the sessions. So I think this is important. Promoting responsible GenAI use, clearly there are issues, concerns about authorship and ethical responsible use of GenAI, over-reliance. And how do you achieve this balance between human judgment, and how do you critically evaluate the outputs from Gemini? And there's always this, again, threat, the risk of loss of intellectual independence. So this is one of the real challenges. And I think that the approach has been to integrate AI literacy training into the module. So we do have to make sure that students there are clear expectations, and I thought that one approach was to adopt the students as partners approach to co-design ethical guidelines with students. So it is important for them to be involved in these conversations and in the decision making, and to always emphasize that we have to follow a human-centered approach, and highlighting the importance of agency, responsibility, and ethics. And finally, managing the time and cognitive workload required, because there are multiple sources of feedback, and students have to actively engage and critically evaluate each type of feedback. So this is why we had a staged implementation of feedback, a very clear structure, and it was important to build in time for reflection after each feedback episode. So just to conclude, I think some of the key points that emerge from this case study, generative AI feedback, when strategically designed into the learning process, can be a valuable complement to traditional human feedback from peers and teachers, rather than a replacement. This integration requires a human-centered approach, ensuring that while GenAI offers support, human judgment is of critical importance. Critically assessing GenAI outputs rather than accepting them as face value is essential for developing students' critical AI literacy and critical usage. And ultimately, as Behrman and Lakin and others affirm, it is human judgment of quality that ultimately prevails, positioning students and teachers, humans, as the indispensable arbiters of quality in this evolving feedback landscape. So this brings me to the end. Just to mention that hopefully we'll be able to collect a richer data set, because I am at the moment replicating this study in the context of our summer pre-sessional, collecting different types of data. And just to a brief reference to an Erasmus Plus research project I'm involved in, Infinite AI for Teaching, Learning and Assessment in Higher Education. My main responsibility in this project is to develop AI literacy training courses for lecturers and students. So my main focus is the MA TESOL students and educators and EAP. So if you are interested in this type of research activities, and if you would like to offer your feedback or simply connect with me, I'd be more than happy to have a chat, and I would love to hear from you. So these are my slides, and thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Stergiani. I just wanted to check, would it be possible to share the slides with the participants? Maybe, if that's okay, maybe for reference, if that's okay.
Yes, I'm happy to share the slides, although you see, this is unpublished data.
Okay.
So perhaps I might just delete the slides which include the data because I have manuscripts in progress at the moment.
Of course.
And this is a pilot study that will be published shortly. So I might just delete the quantitative, qualitative data. But everything else, of course, I'm happy to share.
If you could, it would be very interesting. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Stergiani, for your presentation. I was just thinking, if it's possible, just because we are quite a large group, I know there are some questions in the chat already. Thank you so much. How do you feel if we maybe go into breakout rooms for 10 minutes just to have a chat in smaller groups? You could probably reflect on what you heard and maybe your personal experiences. And in 10 minutes time, we'll come back and to a plenary, and maybe you'll bring back some new questions right from your discussions, and we could continue with in the plenary. I hope that's okay.
That sounds great. So I might just stop the recording now then, Dina.
Yes, we will stop